Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the fourth event this year for the Office of Public Policy. The Florida Gulf Coast University started this series just this year, and we're really looking forward to ending the year on a high note with our distinguished guests. My name is Kitty Green, and I'm Vice President for Advancement at Florida Gulf Coast University. And I am pinch hitting because our provost, Mark Rieger, is normally the moderator for these events. And he is home in bed, and he sounds horrible. So be glad that he is not here with us. So I will do my best. Fortunately, he and Julie did all the work for this. So all I have to do is ask the questions. So today's session is called Crossing the Political Divide. And we will talk with two members of the Florida House of Representatives who managed to reach across the aisle and work together to sponsor legislation important for the citizens of the state of Florida. That seems to be a rare occurrence. So hopefully we will learn how we can encourage more of that behavior. We have an hour for that conversation, and we'll take the first 30 to 40 minutes, and I will ask some prepared questions to sort of set the stage. And then at the second half of the presentation, we'll have time for your questions, even yours. So before we go there, though, we do have a few special guests in the audience. First, I have to introduce my boss, President Ashigal Timur. And we also have Representative Adam Botana with us. Thank you for being here. And I think we have someone from Congressman Stubbe's office with us. There he is. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it very much. So Representative Hillary Cassell drove all the way across the state to be with us this evening. She is a first-term Democrat from District 101, which is the Hollywood area on the east coast of Florida. Representative Cassell received her Bachelor of Science from FSU. It's okay, we'll get past that. And her Juris Doctorate from Nova Southeastern University Shepherd Broad Law School. Representative Spencer Roach is a third-term Republican from District 76, which includes parts of Lee County, Charlotte County, and DeSoto counties. Representative Roach retired after 20 years of service in the U.S. Coast Guard. He received his Bachelor of Arts from FGCU, go Eagles, where he was also named a Soaring Eagle Distinguished Alumni, and he received a Juris Doctorate from the University of Miami. So welcome, and thank you so much for both being here this evening. So I think to kick us off, it would be interesting to hear about how each of you got into politics in the first place. So Spencer, would you like to start that?
Love to. Let me start by thanking President Timur for hosting us and for the tour of the campus today. I graduated this fine establishment in 2005, and I can barely recognize the campus. And I tell everyone that the value of a degree from FGCU is going up exponentially every year. So thank you for your efforts and for your leadership. And also, secondly, I just wanted to mention, Rep. Botana is here, and Rep. Botana serves as a whip in the Florida House, and I wasn't nervous until I saw him walk in the room, so I'm going to have to, draw some of my remarks back here, so I know he's keeping an eye on me. Adam, thank you for coming. Appreciate your support. What was the question, Kitty?
Why did you get into politics?
Why did I get into politics? Insanity. You have to be a little bit insane to get into this business. I had always had an interest in politics. When I graduated high school, I really didn't follow politics very much. But when I began my career in the military, in the Coast Guard, that's when I started to recognize that there were people making decisions, literally life and death decisions, for me and my crew. And I started to pay a little bit more of attention to national events and things that were happening that put us or others in harm's way. One thing that I did in my service, I did a 6-month combat deployment with the Navy back in 1999. This was in the run-up to the Second Gulf War. So getting sent into a combat zone, you start paying a little bit more of attention to world events. So that piqued my interest in politics. I volunteered on some campaigns. I managed the State House campaign at one point in time, did a congressional internship. Always thought that I would like to play some role in policy. Never envisioned that I would end up running for elected office myself. We have 8-year term limits in the Florida House. This seat opened up. I got sort of recruited to run, thought about it, prayed about it. They said, it'll be easy. You'll be the only one in the race. I filed within a week. There were 3 other candidates, and it was a 4-person primary. So that's how I got here.
That's wonderful. How about you, Representative Cassell?
I'm still looking for that answer every single day. Actually, I came from a political family. My mom was a local elected official. So growing up, I would leave the house and my mom would say, don't do anything to get your name or my name in the newspaper. And she meant it. And she's a scary woman. So I always really thought I would never enter this world. Having lived, and not going to Publix, or you'd walk down one aisle and someone would love my mom, and then the next aisle somebody would hate her. It was hard as a child because, my mom's my hero. But I am a property insurance expert. That's what I've spent the last 15 years of my legal career focusing my attention on. And I got engaged in the legislative process as a consumer advocate, going to Tallahassee, engaging with legislators, talking to them about obviously what's a really complex topic, and realized that we needed somebody with a level of expertise on this particular topic in Tallahassee. And I looked at my 5-year-old and also knew that I didn't want him to grow up in a world where politics was so divisive. And I come from a conservative family, so my conversations at Christmas are very similar to the conversations Spencer and I have had as we prepared to have this conversation of how do you cross that political divide. So I think coming from a family and being able to have those conversations across the aisle, not only with my family members, but my colleagues, was something that I thought that I could bring to the table and maybe get things accomplished as a Democrat in this political world in Florida.
Well, thanks. So the bill that you worked on together is House Bill 1213, the windstorm coverage by Citizens Property Insurance Corporation. Can one of you sort of give us the overview of the bill?
I'll start and turn it over to Hillary. So we actually have an insurance commissioner that lives in Lee County. His name is Chuck Quackenbush. He was the insurance commissioner for the entire state of California. I believe it was an elected position. And he had approached me at one point and talked to me about this program they have in California called the CEA, the California Earthquake Authority, and how Florida might want to look at that as a model to adopt a form of universal wind coverage, uses citizens as that vehicle. And so he planted a seed there, and I did some research on the CEA, the program that California has had in place for about 30 years, and I looked at the model that Texas has. They offer a windstorm insurance program, much like the idea we have now. They've been doing it for over 50 years. And then I thought, this is an interesting idea for Florida. I wish that I could say it was an original idea, but I did some research, and this is an interesting part of this sort of journey that we've been on. I found some articles in the Tampa Bay Times written by a reporter named Lawrence Mower, detailing the efforts of a former state representative that served back in the 70s. He owned an insurance agency. His name was Don Crane. Representative Crane is still living. I think he's in his early 90s now, long since retired. In 2006, he got dropped by his own insurance, and so he put together a task force and came up with the idea that Hillary and I are advancing now. And it kind of got buried. It never saw the light of legislative day. And I reached out to this reporter, Lawrence Mower, and said, hey, I've been reading some of your work in the Tampa Bay Times. Can you connect me with some of these people who were on this task force? And he did. And I got volumes of research and reports from this working group, digested them, and then used that as the basis for the bill that Hillary and I ultimately filed. And that's how the idea sort of was born. But the idea, quite simply, is when you look at California, what happened in California in 1994, they had the Northridge earthquake hit. It was a 6.7 magnitude on the Richter scale. In the aftermath of that earthquake, 97%, think about that, 97% of the homeowners insurance market either left California completely or simply refused to write policies offering earthquake coverage. So the insurance industry completely collapsed in California. The California legislature came in 1995 and passed a program called the CEA, California Earthquake Authority, which isolated the risk of earthquakes, compartmentalized that into a public-private partnership called the CEA that offered this coverage through the state. And it resulted in premiums being lowered, and the private market was able to come in and absorb all non-earthquake related insurance policies and the rates dropped like a stone, and it was much more competitive. And by the way, that was signed into law by Pete Wilson, a Republican governor of California in 1996. So I looked at that, looked at Texas, and we had some experts helping us for Weiss Ratings that helped look at some of this the bill, and that was the genesis of the bill. Wow. Hillary?
Take up where he left off.
Sure, and that's really a great summary, and to really kind of talk about how Spencer and I got working together as a first-year freshman. Spencer and I had the opportunity to serve on the Hurricane Resiliency Committee and just had detailed conversations about his personal experience, obviously having been through a hurricane and the devastation that it left this community. And somebody like me who spent an entire legal career focusing on this area of law, having represented every insurance company in the world and switching hats and starting to represent consumers about 10 years ago. So for me, it was really important to partner with somebody who has a true understanding of what life after a catastrophic loss is like and how devastating it can be, because those are the calls that I receive every single day. But really to kind of even break the bill down, I'm a big believer at the end of the day, we've been in an insurance crisis since 1993 to some extent, and it even predates that. But we've been in some form of crisis since Hurricane Andrew, and insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And while we're seeing a lot of positives that are supposedly coming out as a result of the reforms that have been passed, which really focused, in my opinion, on a lot of anti-consumer reforms, litigation, which was a part of the problem, but it's really not the problem that results in the high premiums that you're facing. 40 to 50% of what you're paying in your insurance premium goes to reinsurance companies. Those are just plan Bs, so to speak, for insurance companies that don't have the capital to pay out claims. So I always tell people, think of it like an airplane, right? Think of it about an airline. An airline will oversell the amount of seats that they have because that's how they're going to make a profit. And they just hope that not everybody comes in and turns in their airline ticket on the same day. Well, that's what happens with the insurance companies that we have here in Florida. We are a small domestic insurance company state, meaning the State Farms, the Progressives, the large national companies that you think of aren't in Florida writing property insurance. So who is? These are small companies that, generally speaking, don't have the money in the bank account to cash in on all those plane tickets when people call with claims. So they have to rely on a reinsurance market to cover what their bank accounts won't cover. Well, reinsurance, like I said, is 40 to 50% of what you pay in your premium, and it's unregulated companies located overseas in Jamaica, in Bermuda, in London, in Switzerland that are unregulated, that we have no ability to regulate their profits. We have no ability to regulate their prices. Reinsurance costs have been on the rise since 2018 at a minimum of 30%. So when you ask why your premium's going up, it's going up because of reinsurance. Now, what have all the reforms that we've passed done? Well, it's insanity. All that's happening is we're creating the same companies to come to Florida. Small companies, undercapitalized, rely heavily on a reinsurance market. So what does that tell me? In 20 years, if we don't do something totally different than what we're doing, the companies that you see coming to Florida, where we're patting ourselves on the back saying, look, we have 6 new insurance companies coming. In 20 years, we'll have the same conversation. Those companies will have gone insolvent. They will have left us all high and dry after those major storms hit, and we'll be having the same conversation. So it was important for me when drafting legislation that really is such an overhaul of the system, that it was done in a bipartisan fashion, because this is an issue that impacts you whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. A hurricane doesn't decide they're going to hit your house because you're a Democrat or a Republican, and it's something that we as Floridians really need to think about how we're going to overhaul this system and look after Florida, and I think that's what our bill does.
And Kitty, if I could just add a little bit of context, which I should have mentioned previously. My home in North Fort Myers, in a neighborhood now I realize appropriately called Waterway Estates, this neighborhood. When I bought the house in 2018, I did my due diligence, did my research, not only in the history of Lee County, but in the entire history of Florida that I could find. That area has never flooded, and my neighbors and I were convinced it would never flood. It was impossible. Well, the impossible happened. I got close to 2 feet of water in the house. Everything was gone. And my insurance company at the time was UPC, who went into receivership, went bankrupt, went belly up. I would have been better off had I never had homeowners insurance and just banked those premiums. So they left me and many of my constituents, friends, and neighbors literally and figuratively high and dry. So, of course, I felt the sense of righteous indignation and outrage that for years I'd been paying these high premiums. And, to add insult to injury, it's not just that I was paying high premiums. No one wants to do that. But when you're paying high premiums for a product that you believe is going to be there when you need it, and then the product is not there when you need it, and you've been in good faith paying these premiums year after year, that really adds insult to injury. And that's where my focus was, to start the research to say, hey, this is not good enough. What we are doing now is not working. And then I believe, and Hillary can correct me if I'm wrong, we came back in a special legislative session. Hillary had just been elected to the Florida House. I believe it's literally her first day on the House floor. And we were debating, I believe it was a tort reform package dealing with insurance. And out of nowhere, this voice came from the back row that stood up, first time speaking on the House floor. And just immediately, I think everyone in the chamber recognized that this woman knows what she is talking about. And she immediately solidified herself as a, an expert, probably the preeminent expert in the legislature on this subject matter. So I was looking for someone that was certainly smarter than I was on the issue, and it was yeah, it's absolutely true, absolutely true. I'm continuing to learn from her on these issues, but optically, it was important to me to get citizen engagement and buy-in that it was bipartisan. I think those optics were important. I wanted the citizens of Florida to know that this is not a Republican problem or a Democrat problem, and it requires a bipartisan solution.
So can you speak a little bit more to the specifics of the bill?
Sure. I don't know what you would like to know, but if this bill were implemented, what this would do is it would reform Citizens as the vehicle to offer universal windstorm coverage for any Florida homeowner who wants it. And I want to stress that that's optional. If you wanted to go out and purchase private insurance, which you can do now, you could still do that. I don't know why you would want to, because it would be prohibitively expensive, just like it is now. And what this would do is it would segregate, it would categorize the unknowable, uninsurable risk of when a hurricane is going to hit, how big it will be, how expensive the damage will be. That will be covered by Citizens. So all the other bread and butter homeowner policy issues that a citizen covers now, the free market could do. And I have people on the right, Republicans, colleagues, friends that have said to me, well, this is socialist. And I look at them and my explanation is this. Okay, if this is socialism, what do you think the National Flood Insurance Program is now? What do you think the $2 billion reinsurance bailout that the Florida legislature gave to the insurance companies after Ian is? I would argue that this plan is actually more capitalistic in nature than what we have now, because right now you have Citizens offering coverages that the free market is available and capable of offering. So if you just sort of segregated Citizens to offer windstorm coverage only, you could invite the free market back in to pick up these other coverages. They would make a fortune because they'd be able to adequately forecast their risk. They would be able to insure knowable risk that are actuarially sound, and Citizens could pick up the rest. But more importantly, to me, once you filed a claim, you could bank on the fact that your claim would get paid. What's happening now is I have zero faith that my new insurance company, once the big storm comes, if it comes again, that they're going to pay out a claim. I have serious doubts that they're capitalized correctly. And this is what happens over and over again. It's happened for 50 years. It's a boom and bust cycle. It's always a boom for insurance industry executives, and it's a bust for Florida homeowners. We need to stop doing that. We need a big, bold, transformative idea to reform the system, and that's what we're trying to do.
So,
and just to add to that, really the way that it operates, we can look to Monroe County. So Monroe County has been wind only in the state of Florida, offered by Citizens for going over 25 years. And every single year Citizens has turned a $50 million profit from those policies, despite having numerous hurricanes in Monroe County. So we know from a financial standpoint, the model works. And the way that it works at the end of the day is, we didn't have a hurricane for more than 10 years in the state of Florida. And when I was going to Tallahassee as a consumer advocate, my conversation with legislators always was, where'd the money go? Because as soon as Irma hit, everybody was crying, we're broke, we have no money, we're going insolvent. Well, what have you done for the last 11 years when we didn't face a hurricane? Had we adopted this plan in 2006 when it was first presented, the premiums that would be paid on these policies on a statewide basis go into a fund. And they're there for us when it's time, when that big hurricane hits, that we can rely on that money to be there, versus some executive in an insurance company in the good years taking that money, paying off their stockholders, buying their big houses, and then when the storm hits, there's no money left to pay the claims. I'm a big believer in allowing Floridians to take care of Floridians. And the concern oftentimes is, well, what about the risk? What about the risk of a potential assessment in the event of one of those big storms? Well, that risk already exists, whether it's an all citizens policy or a private insurance company. You all are currently being assessed right now because of the failure of UPC, a private insurance company whose profits went to their stakeholders, to their executives, and when the time came to pay the claims, the money wasn't available, and we've all received at least a 1% assessment on our insurance policies to pay because some executives took the money. I know I would rather my money to go towards paying for my neighbors in the event of an assessment rather than paying as a result of some executive taking the profits and leaving the state.
Yeah, and just to clarify that too, going back to some of the criticisms that we face, I mean, I'm an unapologetic capitalist. I mean, I want people to go out and make money, but when you are offering a product for sale and in good faith consumers are purchasing that product and then you don't deliver the product when the time comes, that's not capitalism. I mean, that's crony capitalism. That's fraud, and I think that's wrong. And then we've given literally billions of dollars of taxpayer money to bail out these insurance companies. And to my mind, if we're going to give taxpayer money to bail someone out, it shouldn't be insurance industry executives. It should be Florida taxpayers and homeowners. And that's what this is seeking to do, is to end this boom and bust cycle. And really, this has been going on since the late 1920s with the great hurricane of 1926, which decimated the booming real estate industry in Miami. That's how long this has been going on. It's cyclical. And my question to folks is what we are doing now working? It's not working. And if someone has a better idea of how to improve and reform Florida's insurance industry, I'm all ears, but I haven't heard one. And going back to the working group of 2006, there are a number of studies on this, one by the Florida Chamber of Commerce, who at the time endorsed the idea, another from at least two former CEOs of Citizens itself, that once they left Citizens said, yes, this idea is reasonable, this can work for the state of Florida. And I like to put this out there too. This is not theoretical. Texas has been doing a version of this for over 50 years. California has been doing a version of this for earthquakes, not hurricanes, for over 30 years. Texas still doesn't have a state income tax. They're still financially solvent. California has other issues. But I think we can take best practices from the models of states like Texas and California and craft a solution that works for Florida. And that's what our bill seeks to do.
So the bill wasn't heard this session. Can you explain?
Well,
okay.
I'm gonna say this, and this is where we're gonna give you a little bit of a peek behind the political curtain in Tallahassee. We did not have a Senate sponsor. We worked very hard to try to get a bipartisan Republican and Democrat couple in the political odd couple in the Senate to do the same thing we were doing in the House. We were unsuccessful. And typically, when you don't have a Senate sponsor for a bill, it's very unlikely that the House is going to waste time hearing a bill that can't possibly make it to the governor's desk. And I was not even going to ask for a hearing. I thought it was a foregone conclusion that this would never even be taken seriously, but we were going to wage a information campaign in the media. And I was talking, and I don't think that he would mind if I shared this, but I was talking with the incoming speaker, a gentleman from Miami named Danny Perez, about this. And he said, well, are you going to ask for a hearing? And I said, no, I wasn't even planning on asking for a hearing. So he said, you should go ask the speaker for a hearing. And I did. I went and asked Speaker Renner for a hearing. And even before that, 9 months before I filed the bill, I went in to talk to the speaker about the bill. And I said, hey, I have this idea. I'm going to file the bill. I'm not necessarily asking for permission, but I'm letting you know that I'm going to file the bill, and I'm going to be very, very careful in my public comments not to disparage anything that the legislature has done so far, which I voted for those reforms in good faith. Many of my colleagues did. But I think it hasn't been enough. I think we have failed our constituents in this. Yeah, and I have this idea. And he said to me, okay, file the bill. And if I get questions in the media about it, I'm not gonna kind of, tap dance all over your bill. I'm not going to say anything disparaging about the bill. I'll simply say that it merits consideration. And sure enough, I filed the bill, and the first question the speaker got about the bill, he said, I think that's an idea worthy of consideration. And so I went later and asked for a hearing, and we worked out the details. There was some negotiation, and we got to present this in a workshop format in the Insurance and Banking Committee, which is way more than I thought we would get this session. So it tells me that there are members of the leadership team in Tallahassee that think that this is reasonable and meritorious and should get a hearing.
So what's the plan for next year?
Reason we're here.
One of the things you learn in this process is oftentimes really great ideas still take a long time to pass. It's very rare the first time you present an idea for it to make it all the way. So I don't think Spencer nor I had any thought whatsoever that we would get a hearing, let alone really being able to have detailed conversations about it. So the fact that we were able to workshop it really was huge and allowed us that opportunity to start the conversation. And this is a huge bill that would overhaul the entire system. And I think as a result of that, it takes events like this, having conversations in the community, having those conversations with stakeholders, and recognizing that, this was really our first work product, and knowing that there are big concepts to have conversations about. And that's what Spencer and I are willing to do. We're putting in that time and that effort to make this bill the best possible bill that we can be. But as an insurance expert, I have a grasp of the history of this crisis, and have the ability as a result of that to understand where we're potentially going if we don't change that. And I think we're starting to get other members on board, recognizing that we're going to need to do more. And this concept that citizens should be the insurer of last resort, it never has been since its inception. And it was actually created as a wind-only joint underwriting association. So the concept behind Citizens was always to be a wind-only product. So the fact that we've evolved into, not only are we not just wind, we provide everything. And the concern with Citizens today is that it insures the most vulnerable properties in the state, our condos, our coastline, as well as maybe those zip codes where the resources to upgrade and harden homes isn't there. So when you have these new insurance companies that are cherry picking the best possible policies, it's not alleviating any of the burden that we have as Floridians for potential risk, for a potential assessment in the event that big storm hits. So I look at these companies and say, what actually are you getting? What are you providing the citizens of Florida? And if you're not going to provide that relief, then we need to do that.
And Kitty, you're asking the next step. I mean, the next step is we're making our case to you, the general public. And when I went to Tallahassee before last session, I mean, I'll tell you, my friends and neighbors were ready to get out the torches and pitchforks and come for us. I mean, they were demanding action. And regardless of what happened with the bill, I owed it to my constituents to go home after session, look at them in the eye and say, I tried to do something. I put forth a big, bold, transformative idea, and I'm trying to do something. And we got further than I thought we would get. But we need to get this idea out there in the public. And if this gets a hearing next year and gets a vote, by the time it gets through the committee process, the best minds in the country will hack it up, offer piecemeal cuts here and there, and we'll end up with a much better product. But I really believe that Florida will eventually and inevitably have to embrace this model when the insurance industry collapses. And had we had another Hurricane Ian last year, and should we have another Hurricane Ian this year, the insurance industry in Florida will absolutely collapse like it did in California. And then I hope someone, picks this plane off the shelf, blows the dust off of it, and say, hey, this guy Roach and this rep Hillary Cassell, they had this idea. We should take a look at it. So what we're doing now is building public support and hoping that you will ask your reps and your state senators, hey, can you get behind this? What are you doing? We need some relief here.
So I'm sure we'll have more conversation about the insurance issues when we get to the questions from the audience. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit more about the bipartisan nature of what you have done. Were there other initiatives in the House that were bipartisan that were successful that you can speak to? Are there any lessons learned that you have encountered?
Well, I would say this. I reached out to the House Clerk's office this morning through my staff. Thank you, Elena. And we got a number of bills. There were 356 bills filed in the Florida House this year. I think almost 80% of them were bipartisan in nature that passed the Florida House. There were only, believe it or not, this is incredible, there were only 3 bills out of 356 that were a straight party line vote.
Yep.
And actually none of them were on issues you would think. That none of them were on abortion, none of them were on gun control, none of them were on immigration. In fact, I looked at the 3 bills. I don't even remember what these were about. One was a local bill. But that's not what you hear on Twitter. That's not what you see on Facebook. It's not what you hear in the media, because that kind of stuff, that kind of bipartisan cooperation doesn't generate likes or clicks or whatever. But there's a lot more bipartisanship in the Florida House and Senate than you would ever imagine. So this is not unusual. I think the unusual nature of this was that it's such a high profile issue. And look, the insurance lobby in Florida is very strong. There are certainly people that think we're on the wrong track and want to oppose this. But again, optically, it was important to me that my constituents and citizens of Florida knew that this was a good faith bipartisan effort to find a real solution. And there's no one that I would rather work with on this issue than Hillary Cassell, and I hope to work with her again next year.
That's very encouraging to hear. Were there obstacles in your own journey caused by the fact that you were coming from 2 different parties?
I mean, my lane's a little bit different, obviously, as the Democrat, in a super minority. I came here to get a job done. So as a result of that, I'm not somebody that's out there, looking to have the Twitter fame. I know that some of that can cause negative response with your colleagues. So I try to go there to do the work and to do the job. And I think that's the reputation that I've created and allows me that opportunity to work across the aisle. But again, there is no pushback, because at the end of the day, 80% of the work that we do with full bipartisan support. I mean, Representative Botana and I was the prime co of a boat insurance bill that he ran last year. Another piece of legislation that I passed this year was with Representative Joel Rudman, a domestic violence bill that, again, isn't a partisan issue. We want to protect children. We want to protect families in those situations. And I served as the prime co of that legislation as well. So I think it was important for Spencer and I to get out here to have these conversations, because that's not what you see on the news. You don't have any idea that 80% of the time we are working with our colleagues across the aisle. But it not only takes us being willing to do that, it takes the support of your community, right? Not everyone in the community necessarily wants to hear if you're working across the aisle, because they don't then think maybe you're red enough, or they don't think that you're blue enough. But the reality is, good ideas come from everywhere. And you can't necessarily just always assign a letter to it. You got to look at the idea in front of you, and is it something you think your constituents will support or not? So, I enjoy the process and knowing that I can look to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to just get good legislation passed.
And then, some of the real world obstacles that we did face. I mean, I know from the public perception is that we filed this bill and we saw the speaker, we got a hearing, and we presented it. You think back to the old, schoolhouse, how a bill becomes a law. Man, wow, nothing could be further from the truth. And we did encounter some real obstacles, and one of those, and I hope I'm not sort of talking too much here, but when we finally got the green light to present the bill in the workshop and we started preparing, I got a phone call. And I'm not gonna put anyone on the spot, but there was a concerted effort that said, "Hey, we're giving you an opportunity to present this bill, but only you can speak in committee. Hillary will have no speaking role in presenting the bill in committee in the workshop." And that's the condition that if we're giving you some latitude here, we're going to let you present the bill, but Hillary can't be at the podium with you and she can't speak on the bill. And man, that's a tough choice, because if I push back, I'm going to lose the opportunity to potentially present what I think is a statewide solution to this critical problem that Florida's facing. But at the same time, if the roles were reversed, how would I feel? And not only that, but my response was, I need Hillary. She's smarter than I am on this issue. I'm going to crash and burn if I don't have her up there to help me answer some of these tough questions. She really knows way more than I do on the subject. Like, I cannot do it without her. It truly is a bipartisan effort. And then I said, no, I can't do that. I have to have Hillary with me. She has to be able to speak on the bill. And they with somewhat reluctance, agreed. And so those were some of the real world obstacles that we had to kind of push through to get this in the format that we wanted to. But it was important to me and for the public. If it's bipartisan in name only, and you only see a Republican representative at the podium talking about this, that kind of undercuts the message that we're trying to send to our constituents and fellow Floridians. So that was important to me, that we had equal ownership, equal authorship of the bill. And truly, I am not an expert in this. I have not been doing this for 15 years. I'm a retired Coast Guard officer. All I know about homeowners insurance is what I've read in the last year and what I experienced myself. But I needed someone with that deep bench, that deep well of knowledge to help me out with that. And she has absolutely provided that level of expertise that we needed to try to sell this bill.
Thank you.
And my side was like, yay, go Hillary. So I wasn't privy, obviously, to those conversations, and I'm beyond appreciative because, there is a level of politics, right? That while and I know Spencer and I are in this for the right reasons, and we really are for the people, but there is an element to this of personal motivation and personal, authorship in some of these things. So it would have been very easy for Spencer to say, sorry, Hillary, I want to present this idea, and these are the terms that have been given to me. So the fact that he, really felt so strongly that we should do this together and we are a team in this really means a lot to me because I know it means I picked the right partner too.
So. Yeah, and on the issue of civility, I just want to get this out there in case it doesn't come up in Q&A, but there are some issues principally that Hillary and I will never agree on. And the problem that we have in today's politics is those become the issues that are the primary focus, right? These wedge issues that just divide people and force you to put yourself in one of these two boxes, either red or blue. And I think in situations like this, we can look at these issues that we'll never agree on and we table those. Okay, we can get to these issues once we solve for attainable housing, once we solve for affordable property insurance, once we solve for infrastructure, once we solve for safe schools. Maybe then we can get to these issues that we are going to fight like cats and dogs on. But I think that there certainly needs to be more civility. And I would say this, and Hillary and I were talking about this earlier today, even though I feel very strongly, and we disagree very strongly on some issues, it doesn't mean that I hate her. It doesn't mean that I want her to be deplatformed. I don't want her to be debanked. I don't want her to lose her job. I don't have any personal animosity towards her. And I think that the fact that we're both lawyers, we have a code, rules of professional conduct. I think it's like rule number 4 about conducting yourself civilly as attorneys. We've been trained to treat people civilly that we disagree with. And I think we just need more of that in politics. We can disagree all day long, but it doesn't mean that I hate you. And I want the general public to take that message away. You could disagree with your neighbor on a variety of issues, abortion, gun control, immigration, whatever it is, but you should be able to disagree like reasonable adults without hating the other person or wanting some kind of harm to befall them.
Thank you. I think, yeah, agreed. I think that is a good point at which we can open it up to the audience to see what your questions are. Yes, sir.
Hi, I come here as in a little different flavor. I come here as a victim of your legislation, and here's why. I'm a homeowner in Florida, but I'm not a Florida resident, nor do I intend to be. I am a New Yorker and very proud to be so. You have a great state, and thank you for allowing me here. But we come to a bigger picture here, and here's what it is. We're developing a 2-tiered system of resident and non-resident. You see it in such petty ways, like if one wants to go use a library computer in some libraries, well, you have to pay $1 or $2 if you're not a resident of that library. Now, it's a big stretch up to this, but the Virginia legislature did something weird once. They wanted to pass a legislation with a 2-tiered system of traffic tickets. If you were not a resident, you got a different charge than a resident would. Didn't pass, but it was opening up that door. And I worry about the door we're opening here because I lived in Europe a good part of my life. I'm retired from the Navy. And when you cross some borders, it's all the EU, well, you got to pay an extra road tax. So are we looking at the day when the courts are favoring you all as states' rightists, the day when a broke state, fortunately neither of ours, but a broke state can say, well, come drive through our state, you're going to pay a little extra in that. And, you see where I'm going with this? And these are discussions that I thought we had 160 years ago that was called the Civil War. And I know I'm extrapolating it out.
Yes.
But I know somebody in this crowd, I know somebody here is going to say, this legislation is great. Let's stick it to that damn Yankee. So comment on that two-tiered idea, because I'm going to pay more now for my insurance. A little bit more to start, but it's going to be a lot more later.
I'll try to answer that the best way that I can. So I would say this, the legislation we have proposed is not currently the law of the land. So no one is being helped or being victimized by this. This is a legislative proposal. It's an idea right now. It hasn't even passed one full committee. So this is not law. So nothing that we are talking about has impacted your rates or has resulted in anyone paying more money. And as to your last comment about paying more, that's absolutely the opposite. I mean, what we're trying to do here is lower premiums for everyone that owns a home in Florida, whether you live in Florida or not. And I'm convinced when you look at the California model, the Texas model, the reason that those programs are still in place after 50 and 30 years is because they have absolutely worked to lower premiums. And I think that would happen here. So, I'll be very clear. My goal is to reduce property insurance premiums for everyone in the state of Florida and to ensure that home ownership is attainable for the younger generation. And look, I will tell you this, myself personally, my house payment has gone up $1,000 a month. $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year. That's an enormous sum of money because the insurance has gone up so much. So I'm trying to, this affects me personally. It's not working. So I think we need to do something to address that. But the goal here is not to have out-of-state residents come in here and foot the bill. I want everyone who owns a property in the state of Florida to pay the lowest premium they can while guarantee that their claims will be paid. That's my goal.
Calling them up.
Hi, thank you for all your comments. Is there a financial calculation that shows the economy would get a big boost with the big companies coming here and staffing up to compete, and with homeowners having more disposable income so they'd spend it in the community? And does that financial calculation help your case?
So you're asking if there's a financial calculation or an economic calculus about what it would do for the economy to have some of these private market companies come in. No, I don't have any data on that. And I think the impact on the actual economy, you would see that in the real estate market in the terms of a home value stabilizing, in some cases lowering. I mean, I've got senior citizens in my neighborhood, in my district, all around the state that are now paying more for property insurance premiums than they are for their mortgage. So I think that's where you would see sort of an economic stabilization and potential rebound in the housing market and the insurance market. But you've asked about data, and more to your point, there is some data out there. And Hillary had mentioned, you look at Lee County. I think we had Hurricane Charlie that hit in 2004, right? And then 13 years later, in 2017, you had Hurricane Irma. So you went for about a 13-year period without having a significant storm. And we have some data that if we had a similar decade and a half of no storms, these premiums that you would pay into citizens with our plan would not be siphoned off to a management company. They would not be siphoned off in the form of executive pay. Yes, you would have an executive who got paid, but these premiums would just redound year after year after year and build up these collateral reserves for these companies to pay premiums. There's one study we looked at that showed had this been passed in 2006 when Representative Don Crane put forth the idea, there would be upwards of 80 billion. That's 80 billion with a B. I mean, that's just slightly less than the entire Florida state budget in this kitty to pay out these claims. So that's where I think there is real data out there, and we need to get some more of it. And if this moves forward, and we have a real staff analysis, we will get some better data on that. But Hillary, you have anything to add on that?
The only thing that I would add to that is, again, we know that the model works by looking at Monroe County, knowing that Citizens turns and a $50 million profit in its worst year, even after a storm, with this model. But the incentive to the other big insurance companies is we've removed the biggest risk out of your concern. You're no longer worried about the 1 in 100 year storm or the multiple storms in a year, because we're going to take on that risk for you. Now come in, cover all other perils at a much more reasonable rate, where your overall policy would be reduced from what we're paying today. And again, the difference between a Citizens model versus a private carrier model is private carriers are paying management companies, they're paying, extensive overhead, they're paying executives, they're paying taxes, all of which Citizens enjoys some benefit because it is a quasi-government entity. We're not worried about paying taxes. We're not paying executives bonuses. So all of that money goes to really benefit Floridians, which is not what we see from the private market. So you're going to see a reduction in premiums and so on and so forth. And that's obviously going to help the economy and the housing market and everything from there.
Yes, sir.
Dad, I think it was, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I want to understand the premise of your bill, which I understand, that citizens insurance would cover basically the disastrous part of any insurance claims, correct? And the smaller ones that still exist would cover your homeowners and all the other little stuff. Is that basically the premise, which I understand, which is excellent? No, but because like you say, the money that goes into Citizen would deal directly with hurricanes, flooding, and wind insurance, which is my concern where I live right now. The other short question, which I know you don't have an answer to, but do you have any type of timeline for this, 1 year, 2 year down the road? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but, throw a number at me.
Well, my timeline would be we should have done this in 2006 when Representative Don Crane put forth the idea. And Hillary is right when she talks about, doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, and when we presented this bill in committee, I asked the committee members, our fellow legislator, I says, ask yourself one question, is what we're doing now working? And Hillary made the point when she spoke about, if we don't do something now, 20, 25 years from now, we're going to be back here with the exact same issue, just like we were 20 years ago when Don Crane put forth this solution with a big storm comes, these insurance companies go belly up, they go insolvent, they leave the state, and the taxpayers left to foot the bill. This happens over and over again. Back to so no, I don't have any timeline. I have no idea if we'll get a hearing next session or not, if it will pass. We're going to keep working on this. But to the first part of your question, your premise is absolutely correct. Yes, we want to isolate the uncalculable risk that these insurance companies try and fail to calculate. And we want to put that category of risk outside of the private market to the state, to a public-private partnership, which would be Citizens, and allow the homeowners, the free market homeowners insurance companies to come in and cover all your bread and butter policy coverages. I think that is much more free market oriented because now you have Citizens covering full policies. They're covering things. They're offering coverages for parts of the policy that the free market can insure, should insure for.
And just to add to that, you oftentimes when you file this type of legislation, right, you want to see who comes out of the woodwork to tell you why they oppose or support it. And we hear from many insurance companies that, quite frankly, don't like this idea. Well, why don't they like it? The most profitable piece of insurance is the wind portion. That is where they can utilize general managing agents, which unfortunately we don't have the oversight in Florida to follow the money the way that we should through the Office of Insurance Regulation. It's the highest portion of your calculated premium. It's where they can incorporate those reinsurance costs that I talked about, which is 40 to 50% of what you're paying. So if we take that away from the private insurance market and we cover those expenses and we're not worried about paying executives and we're not worried about paying taxes on it, imagine the reduction in premiums you would see.
And just for the record, there are insurance agency executives, owners of insurance agencies here in Florida that have met with me in my office and have offered, unqualified support for this idea. So it's not that the insurance industry as a whole is opposing it. There are segments of the insurance industry that are why wouldn't they be, right? They would make a fortune. They can come back in, pick up all of the other ancillary coverages that Citizens offers, cover those, calculate the risk, using models that are actuarially sound, and never, ever have to worry about writing a hurricane policy. If you are a free market insurance company, I think you should absolutely support this because it eliminates the biggest portion of your risk and allows you to calculate the rest of your risk and make money.
I think we had a question over here. Tanner, can you get the microphone here?
Just as a matter of background, my name is Jim Blue, and I am running to defeat Spencer Roach in District 76. But I do applaud him in attacking this issue, and Hillary as well. When I first heard you were doing this, Mr. Roach, I really was kind of concerned because I thought I'd have no prayer if you were successful at this. So I'm conflicted on this issue. But I do have a kind of a technical question about this that I don't understand. You compared this to TWIA, I guess, maybe I say that
Yes.
wrong, the Texas Windstorm Insurance Agency. Now, I did some research on that, and I don't understand. They are a lot smaller than what you're proposing, which would be everybody basically would have windstorm coverage through this program, right?
Yes.
So they've got about a $4.5 billion pool, or whatever you'd call it, a cushion in their system according to their website. And Ian was, what, $116 billion in losses alone. Something about the math here just doesn't work for me. I don't understand. And maybe you can clarify it for me. They're a lot smaller. What you're proposing is something a lot bigger. Is that feasible? Really?
Yeah. Let me answer that question. So he's making an excellent point. You know, the Texas model offers windstorm insurance through this organization called TWIA, Texas Windstorm Insurance Association. It's been in place since 1971. They offer this for their coastal communities only, for their hurricane-prone communities. And let me talk about why they do that. I have spoken with some Texas legislators about this and why they do that. And the answer is actually very commonsensical. You know, Texas is a huge state. I mean, you have parts of the interior of Texas where there are hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the coast that are never going to be impacted by a hurricane. Florida has a much higher proportion of the state that will be impacted by a hurricane. In fact, I would argue that almost every citizen in the state of Florida was impacted by Ian, no matter where you live. I mean, I represent DeSoto County. They were impacted by Ian from flooding coming down the river. So the reason that Texas has told me that they do not offer this statewide, it's a free market principle reason, which I absolutely understand. They said, look, in the interior of Texas, it would be anti-free market for us to have the state offer wind coverage for tornadoes or anything else that these private market insurance companies can use to calculate their risk. That would be anti-free market. We're isolating that risk only on the coastal areas where it's impossible for a private company to assess the risk, and we know from prior experience, prior to 1971, to actually pay out claims when a hurricane hits. But we feel, Texas legislature speaking here, that we should leave the interior of Texas to the free market because it's not subject to the same cataclysmic storms that our coastal communities are. That made sense to me from a free market perspective. Why use the state? Why use the taxpayers to offer coverages that the free market can and should provide for? Now, Florida is different. Florida has an extensive coastline. We live on a peninsula. Texas is not on a peninsula. And one thing we know for absolute certainty in the state of Florida, it's not a question of when. It's not a question of if. It's a matter of when the next big storm comes. Another big storm will come. But there are probably the vast majority of the state of Texas is not subject to a hurricane or for hurricane-related windstorm damage. So that's why there's a difference in what Texas does. It's a smaller model, isolated only to coastal communities, where I think Florida should be available for every citizen that wants it. And I'll tell you another reason why. And there is an effort, there's a divide of opinion in the legislature about whether citizens would be better off if they shed policies. There's a concerted effort. We had legislation like this in the House to move some homeowners off of citizens. I think that we should do the opposite, because when you talk about how insurance works, it works by pooling risk. The more people you have paying into the pool, the lower the premiums are. So if you have everyone in Florida who wants it paying in for windstorm insurance coverage for citizens, you're going to get a lot more money into the kitty, and you're going to lower premiums for everyone. So that's how I would explain the difference between the Texas model and the Florida model. And look, I'm not claiming that the Texas model would work for Florida. I'm not claiming the California model would work for Florida. What I am suggesting is that we take a look at both of those models, pull out best practices, and craft a model specifically for Florida. And that's what I think we've done with this 180-page bill that we produced. But look, if people have ideas on how to make that product better, I'm all for it.
And I just want to add on to that from the economic standpoint of why it's important to actually spread the risk, and why what's happening right now with the new insurance companies have come to the state are not going to help, is because when they are depopulating citizens or taking out policies from citizens, they get to cherry pick. They're picking the best of the best of the best. They're picking the policies not in the coastal zone. They're not picking the condominiums. They're not picking that vulnerable zip code. So what is that leaving us with? It's leaving us with the highest risk, most vulnerable, most expensive properties to replace. One of the reasons why the cost of reinsurance is also so high is exactly that. We're Florida. When reinsurance companies look to insure the state, not only are we getting charged for wildfires that occur in Maui, we're also getting charged for the fact that we live in a peninsula and hurricanes are not a matter of when, but, not a matter of if, but a matter of when. So by spreading that risk out, what it also does is lowers that cost of reinsurance, because a reinsurance company also says, well, if all of my risk is located on the coast, your reinsurance costs for that insurance company are going to be that much higher because their risk is going to be that much higher. By pooling Citizens' premiums and spreading the risk across the entire state of Florida, the reinsurance market gets to say, okay, the chances of us getting hit all across the state is pretty rare, but also because the state of Florida is backed by, our great credit rating and the fact that we are a financially sound state, reinsurance companies then also say, hey, Citizens, we're going to insure you, and they currently do it now. Citizens isn't required to carry the level of reinsurance that private insurance companies are, which is also why their prices are lower than the private marketplace. So by pulling this all together, reinsurance costs go down, which again impacts you because that's 40 to 50% of what you're paying in your premiums.
Thank you. That's so let's go to somebody who hasn't asked a question yet.
Yes.
Here.
All right, thank you. I really appreciate all this work that's gone in to cooperate on wind, but I just want to point out how catastrophic really the flooding is. When we really compare the types of widespread damage, we know that cars, for instance, are going to be relatively resistant overall, but it took out 20,000 in this community. And so with that in mind, given the recent community rating system crisis that's ongoing and happening here in Lee County with the loss of rating with the community rating system, particularly the Series 400, the regulation, the mandatory regulated duty that the leaders have to follow community rating system guidance to keep those discounts. How is that anti-regulation movement, that sort of tenor that is throughout Florida, as well as the ascension of private property rights, how are those undermining the community rating system requirements to achieve those national flood insurance discounts? And how can that be adjusted in a again, bipartisan effort in the public interest? Specifically, I know that historically there's been a lot of resistance for disclosure of repetitive flood properties, and that the modeling has become so well known it's caught up with that. I'm just really interested in terms of what sort of efforts are made to attack those barriers.
Yeah, I'll try to answer that the best I can. So she's referring to a series of stories in the news lately where some of the municipalities in Lee County have not submitted the appropriate documentation to get their homeowners that live there a flood insurance discount. And as a result, people that live in those municipalities are going to see a $200 to $300 increase in their flood insurance premiums. And the stories that you see, I think Sanibel is one of the municipalities that got it right? And some other municipalities, I think Fort Myers and maybe Cape Coral, are losing the discount because of actions that allegedly their elected leadership failed to take, maybe at the county level, maybe at the city level. And this is the one question I'm going to punt on, because I'm going to say that those issues are those that absence of information that was required to be submitted is at the municipal level and at the county level. It has nothing to do with the state. This is an issue of local government, not state government. So I don't want to comment and make allegations that the county failed to do something, or that Mayor XYZ failed to do something, because quite simply, I don't know. That's an issue you're going to have to take up with the county commission and your elected mayors in those municipalities that FEMA is claiming failed to submit the appropriate documentation, but that's not an issue for the state to address.
Okay, one more question and then we'll close.
I got it.
Okay.
So it's going to be more
Question from a student.
Yeah, we're going to do more of a student perspective question. I've got a couple students in here, and I know I want to see if we can, a lot of us are up and coming in the political science world, looking to work in politics in the future. That's where the interest in this event comes from. So what advice can you offer to students who are looking to join the political realm, looking to get into this work and want to do it for the purpose that a lot of the students I see here want to do it for, and it's that servant side of things, being able to help people, being able to offer those services and step away from the nitty-gritty clashing constantly and be able to provide that service and help? What can you offer for that?
Well, I'll turn it over to Hillary on this one. I'll just say, here's what I would offer. I guess 3 points I would make very quickly. So a lot of Eagles are doing a lot of very good things. When I used to work as the district director for a former Congressman, Francis Rooney, and when I worked for him, I made the point that exactly 50% of his staff at the time, the DC staff and the district staff, were graduates from Florida Gulf Coast University. And I thought that was significant, given the smaller footprint that this university has and the impacts they were having in Washington, D.C. here locally. A number of elected officials here. I think Adam Botana has an honorary degree from FGCU. Tiffany Esposito, that represents this area we're at now as a double eagle, has 2 degrees from here. Ray Rodriguez, who former state senator, now a chancellor, the chancellor of Florida's entire university system, has a degree from FGCU. Brian Hammond, county commission, has a degree from FGCU. I do. My chief of staff, Elena Cosentino, has a degree from FGCU. So stick with FGCU, number one. And okay. And then I would say this, a number of years ago, and this was close to 20 years ago, before I was in elected office, I had an opportunity to have lunch with at the time, the sitting vice president of the United States. And I asked him the exact same question that you're asking. I said, sir, for those of us who have aspirations to get involved in public service, what would you recommend? And I very clearly remember the answer. And he said, Spencer, he said, public service is not just elected office. He said, there are many, many ways to serve the public. You should think about other avenues to serve the public. If that's truly your ambition, think about teaching, think about public service in terms of, police, firefighters, child welfare agencies. So public service is not just elected office. In fact, I would argue that elected office is a path towards poverty and all kinds of other problems that we have. It's a really tough business to be in. But if you want to pursue a career in elected office, start at your grassroots level. There are all kinds of, every county has a Republican executive committee and a Democrat executive committee, probably a handful of libertarian other ones, all kinds of candidates. You see some in this room right now are looking for volunteers, looking for people to help. Get involved in that grassroots level, get your name out there, and you'll get picked up for other opportunities, and including working for the legislature. I mean, Elena was, I think, chair of or president of the FGCU College Republicans, and I was looking for staff. And I remember, I think Ruth Rodriguez, who was on campus staff here, recommended her. And she also recommended Chrissy Houlihan, who served as Ray Rodriguez's chief of staff and is now in the lobbying world. So, Hillary.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is, first and foremost, you got to find what you're passionate about, right? For me, I'm super passionate about insurance, but there's many other things, for me, conversations about mental health are extremely important. So you want to get involved in organizations. You can do public service through nonprofits. You can do public service in so many different ways, as Spencer mentioned. But I think what's most important is, first and foremost, you got to find what you're passionate about, because it can't necessarily be a party, because we see parties change ideals often. So I'm more of the belief, find what you're passionate about, but also step outside your comfort zone. If you have a tendency to lean more blue, try to find a Republican that you could shadow or work with or volunteer for, because I think it's going to require your generation to change our political makeup. And that's going to require not being in your corners. And if you only stick with organizations that follow your particular mindset or your beliefs, you're really closing yourself off to other opportunities that you may not even be aware of, because you just have an idea or stereotype that may not actually be realistic. If you take the time to have those conversations, you find that you actually like the people that you may not agree with on everything, but I also think it's important to continue those conversations, and we're relying on you guys. So please save us.
Thank you.
I think that is a perfect way to close this session out. Thank you so much, Representative Cassell and Representative Roach. Thank you. I'm guessing you'll be around for a few minutes if people have more questions that haven't been asked yet. And maybe one last thing. So if people are interested in helping you get the word out about your ideas, what would you recommend they do? What would you go talk to their Senate leaders?
Yeah, first of all, I would recommend it, and I know I'm giving a lot of plugs to the press here. Google Lawrence Mower, Tampa Bay Times, read his series of articles tracing the evolution of this idea back from 2006. See if it makes sense to you. And if it does, and you encounter people on the county commission, on the city council, or in the state house, ask them, hey, what do you think about this idea, House Bill 1213? What's your solution? Ask what the state of Florida is going to do to help address what I think is a really critical issue facing Floridians. And also in closing, I just want to say thank you for showing up. Thank you for listening to this idea. And thank you for allowing us to work for you. And I tell people, you are my bosses. I work for you, and I never take that for granted. So thank you for allowing me to be your voice in Tallahassee.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here. If you please make sure that you sign in before you leave the room. Thank you.
I don't know. I'll still, I'm afraid. And then it was all in the fabric.